party treasurer talks about us living in the age of entitlement. This is the jargon used to try and attack welfare, to try and attack student welfare. We are living in an age of entitlement. We're living in an age of entitlement where the rich, the 1%, are entitled to keep expanding their wealth while the rest of us keep on suffering further. And let me tell you about student entitlement. Student entitlement right now in Australia. Student entitlement means that students are paying the highest fees that we've ever paid in history. It means the Australian education system is one of the lowest funded systems in the whole of the OECD countries. Student entitlement means 2/3 of students in Australia today living below the poverty line. And yet this government wants to further slash student welfare. They want to take away start-up scholarships, vital welfare for students all across this country. And this government that wants to tell us that we're too entitled, that we don't deserve adequately funded education, that we don't deserve affordable and accessible education. Every single one of the ministers sitting in the government today went to university for free.
A lot of our Indigenous student centres across the country are reliant on direct government funding or on philanthropy. Yet at this time, we're noticing a trend that a lot of our centres are under review. A lot of the support staff from our Indigenous student centres are being mainstreamed into the faculties, which means money is being dispersed in order to support students. And the presence of an autonomous Indigenous student centre on campus is being further and further diminished. Can we guarantee, in an environment of cuts, that these centres, that an Indigenous place on campus is going to survive? Indigenous students are significantly more likely to be of a low SES background and therefore are more likely to actually come away from university in huge amounts of debt. Considering that Indigenous student parity rates are far from actually being reached, what sort of incentive exists to actually get students in the system and therefore get students working through the system and becoming staff in the system? And what sort of system will these students be accessing, these financially crippled students be accessing when they get in? Pyne and Abbott, whilst talking big on things like constitutional recognition, which I want to acknowledge a lot of Indigenous people don't actually support, seem to have a complete lack of interest in an education system where diversity is embraced and Indigenous histories and ways of knowledge are including. Pyne has already made statements criticising the educational industry's leftist bias in the national curriculum and has previously channelled Geoffrey Blaney blasting an apparent black armband of history that we're all being subjected to. Back in 2010, Pyne said that the national curriculum overemphasised Indigenous history. Yeah, I know, it's news to me too. I never experienced this. Yet any small gains that we made on these fronts that were actually made during the 70s, 80s and 90s when historians began to question the version of histories that they were taught, were systematically chipped away by the Howard government to the point of where mainstream Australia is even less knowledgeable on Indigenous subjects than they were back then.
Over the past few months, I've been talking to students a lot about what these cuts mean for them. A lot of students hadn't even heard that there were $2.3 billion about to be ripped out of the system. And it was my job and the job of the National Union of Students team to talk to them about what this means for their education. And what it means is poor education outcomes. It means struggling students worse off. We already see that there are cuts happening all over the country. La Trobe University just announced 350 staff would be sacked. Every time cuts of this nature occur, and as Sarah said earlier, they haven't occurred at this level for almost 2 decades. But every time cuts like this occur, we see bigger class sizes. We see mass staff sackings. We see poorer resources and facilities available for students. Public education as we know it is going down the toilet. And it's really important that we continue this fight against this $2.3 billion of cuts. $900 million, almost $1 billion out of operational grants to universities that they use to educate us, and $1.2 billion saved by burdening students with more debt. By the time they leave university, before they've even thought about going into the workforce, buying a house or a car, just living as normal adults in Australia, they have almost 10 years worth of debt.
Many of the guys here have children, and we're appalled that the next generation of Australians are set to become second best in Abbott's plans for Australia's future. This is not right. But we will fight, and we support you in your fight too. Shame, Abbott, shame! Shame, Abbott, shame! Shame, Abbott, shame!
I was a university student a few years ago now. I know it was quite a long time ago because things were different then. Yes, it was the time when university was free. It should be free now. There is no reason why it shouldn't be free. These cuts that the Abbott government is trying to foist on us truly are dumb cuts. And why? Why was it free for me that I could graduate free as a bird, and yet all of you, including my two tertiary student sons, are going to be saddled with debts that the Abbott government want to increase even more? Why? Why Victorian universities will lose $214 million out of these cuts, and students starting on youth allowance are going to lose $170 million over 4 years. You add to this cutbacks in TAFE, the creeping privatisation of TAFE, and how all these dodgy, poorly regulated TAFE courses. There's been a tripling in funding to private TAFE providers, where the Victorian government cut $300 million out of TAFE last year. The question is, why can't we fund universities properly? It's not because we can't afford it. Don't let anybody tell you that. At the same time as they are cutting $2.3 billion out of university, they are giving away $14 billion in fossil fuel subsidies to the big mining companies. They are planning to abolish the mining tax. They are going to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and kiss goodbye almost $1 billion in funds returning to the government from that Clean Energy Bank. I want to let you know that the Greens have your back. I'm going to take my place in the Senate in July, and I am taking you with me. I am going to be there for you, determined to fight for you, determined to boost tertiary funding by at least $1.5 billion over the next 4 years, and to keep fighting to return us to the days when tertiary education was free and to abolish HEC.